On GB News,
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, the Home Secretary today announced fresh measures to slash mass migration numbers by a supposed 300,000. Everything from reducing foreign healthcare visas dependents to increasing thresholds to £38,700. But the question is, will it be enough? And speaking of mass migration, we know that the bulk of those entering the UK are students. But as it emerges, universities are offering master's degrees for £25,000 in queer Middle East politics. Is it time to crack down on Mickey Mouse degrees? And has Britain got too fat? Analysis has suggested obesity is set to cost the taxpayer, that's you and me, nearly £100 billion a year. But the nanny staters are out and about calling for smoking-style restrictions on junk food, and they must be stopped. A bill is set to be presented to the House of Commons amending the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, which would strip the Duke and Duchess of Sussex of their dukedom. It has been dubbed the nuclear option, but will it make any difference? And the Oxford English Dictionary, that renowned tome or set of tomes, word of the year has been announced. It is Riz, which is apparently short for charisma. My daughter knew what it meant. However, we have released our own poll to the public with the following nominations: latibulate, triskaidekaphobia, sesquipedalian, and others. Results will be revealed later. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by an incisive panel this evening: the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner, and the former Brexit Party MEP and a current sister of mine, Annunziata Rees-Mogg. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. Well, the top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that the Home Secretary says 300,000 fewer people will be able to come to the UK each year under new plans to bring down legal migration. Overseas workers and students will be stopped from bringing any family members with them as dependents. And the minimum salary required for a skilled worker visa will also rise to £38,700 from next spring. Well, James Cleverly made the announcement in the House of Commons this afternoon, and he said the measures are the best way forward for British taxpayers.
It's about making sure that we control immigration, that we stop abuses of the system, but we also protect the economics that underpin our society and our country, and also, of course, support the people who work in our health and social care sectors.
James Cleverly, but the Shadow Environment Secretary hit back. Steve Reed said taxpayers have heard it all before.
How many times have we heard a succession of Conservative Home Secretaries stand up in the chamber of the House of Commons and tell us how much they're going to decrease migration by, only to see it soar in the following few months? Now, the figure that James Cleverly is talking about there, even if he manages to cut it by the amount that he's just said, and I doubt that, given their track record, even then, migration would be around double the level that it was in December 2019 when they told us they were going to cut it.
Steve Reed there. Well, staying with politics, and Sir Keir Starmer says a Labour government wouldn't put more pressure on taxpayers. Speaking in London this morning, Sir Keir pledged his ministers will be ruthless when it comes to public spending. It's after he accused the Tories of letting public finances deteriorate. And he promised Labour would be, in his words, obsessed with economic growth. The Prime Minister said today the BBC should be realistic about what people can afford as far as a licence fee is concerned. The fee is currently £159 a year, but it's thought the corporation wants to increase the charge to £173 a year. The Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser says the planned rise would be very high amid cost of living pressures. GB News understands the broadcaster could be forced to accept a much lower increase. Now, the north of England is set to get extra money to improve its rail services. Ministers are promising to invest almost £4 billion to upgrade the Trans-Pennine route connecting Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. That's after the Prime Minister scrapped the northern leg of HS2 between Manchester and Birmingham earlier on this year. And finally, the majority of pupils at school don't think they're going to need languages for their jobs when they finish education. That's according to a new survey by the British Council, which questioned more than 2,000 pupils from 36 schools across the UK. Nearly half of them said they enjoyed learning languages, but only 20% planned to opt for languages when choosing their GCSEs. Entries for German and French classes have fallen, but there is a slightly greater uptake for Spanish. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
As I said less than 2 weeks ago, the Conservative Party has failed on the issue of mass migration. As figures revealed, net migration last year reached 745,000, that's 2022. And for this year, up until June, it stands at a provisional 672,000. So that's over 1.4 million in 2 years, when we promised to get it down to the tens of thousands. But today, the Home Secretary unveiled another 5-point plan that's intended to put a dent in these numbers, as he said earlier.
I can announce that we will go even further than those provisions already in place, with a 5-point plan to further curb immigration abuses, and that will deliver the biggest ever reduction in net migration. In total, this package, plus our reduction in student dependence, will mean around 300,000 fewer people will come in future years than have come to the UK last year.
It is fascinating that it's going to be a 5-point plan. There must be something the spin doctors think about 5 points that is particularly convincing, because this is our third or fourth from memory. But of this plan, what are the points? Well, the first, to stop the abuse of foreign healthcare worker visas, with visa holders no longer being able to bring dependents, as well as care firms in England who use these visas being regulated by the Care Quality Commission. Second, the current minimum salary, this is really important, for a foreign worker to work in Britain is now £26,200, but this will be increased to £38,700, roughly the median UK salary. Bear in mind, Suella Braverman wanted it £40,000. That was what she suggested previously as the threshold. Third, the shortage occupation list will be overhauled. This is a dreadful policy that has enabled companies to pay foreign workers 20% less than the going rate for a given job, incentivising firms to employ migrants over those already in the UK. And this discount will be ended and the list will be reformed. So it will help domestically employed people get a better standard of living rather than undercutting their wages. Fourth, people will only be able to bring dependents if they can support them financially, with the threshold for salary being increased to £38,700 for family visas. And fifth, a review of the graduate route to prevent abuse and the quality of higher education by concentrating on courses that may actually lead to good jobs, and we'll be discussing funny courses a bit later. The United Kingdom currently has an alleged labour shortage of roughly 1 million, but this is nonsense, because we've been told to believe that we should solve this shortage by importing people when we've got 5 million people on this country on out-of-work benefits now, which is a tragic waste of talent and potential, a cost to the taxpayer, but it condemns these 5 million people to a less prosperous life. The best route out of poverty has always been, is always, employment. And mass migration has been used as a means of obscuring the unemployment crisis we currently face. We left the EU to pursue a high-wage, high-skill economy, but mass migration is the opposite of that, and it's been undercutting British workers. Whilst the nation has fretted over small boats and the Rwanda policy, illegal migration has been worked, at least temporarily, to the Prime Minister's advantage as a distraction from the greater problem of legal migration. The small boats, over the 2 years, 22-23, is 7% of the figure for legal migration. But with the latest figures, the public is no longer distracted and action had to be taken. And this, I think, is a make or break issue for the Tories. The question is, are these reforms too little, too late for us? As always, I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now joined by one of the programme's greatest friends and Transcaucasia expert and former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Stephen.
Good evening, Jacob.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
As a constituency MP, you must have found that uncontrolled migration was something that your constituents were concerned about.
Well, I have to say, Jacob, one thing that absolutely got my goat, and I think hopefully we put an end to, was the bucket shops of these sort of universities that popped up over a chip shop in Newham or somewhere and were dishing out degrees in ludicrous subjects, where people actually had a student visa to come into this country, where they hardly had to turn up for any classes, any lectures. You know, this wasn't, you know, the dreaming spires of Oxford where people were chatting away in Latin epigrams. You know, this were people who were supposed to come over here and actually get a degree. And what happened was that they'd bring the wife, sister, daughter, aunts, grannies, dog walkers, best friend, and next thing you know, they'd set down roots and they'd get permanent residence. The previous government actually did manage to bring an end to this, and we closed a whole load of them down. The issue we have now here with this legal migration is quite simply, and I think it's high time it was done, and I think the previous government should have done it. We should have actually realised if somebody comes here on a work visa or a work permit, except in the most exceptional cases, it should be a temporary job. Just if you went to work in Brussels, or you may well, for all I know, you wouldn't emigrate there. You'd go there and come back. That's entirely legitimate. But I think we're confusing. If I was going to say for a minute, can I give you a 5-point answer? But I'll avoid doing that. Look, there is unskilled labour. There's, the fruit pickers, and the issue there is, like all good socialists, I've come to respect market forces. And I think if we paid people £100 an hour to pick strawberry fields forever, they'd do it. If we paid up £1, they won't. So there's got to be a median point that we find there. There comes to a certain point.
I'm so glad you've said this, because I hate this argument that the British won't do it, they're too lazy. It's not true. It's just they're not paid enough to make it worth their while. And because they're not paid enough, of course they don't have the expertise. But if they were paid an equivalent rate for picking strawberries as they can get doing other jobs, of course they'd do it.
Absolutely right. And I think this is a dreadful mistake that we made. And I'm still actually wincing from Anne Widdecombe on GB News, where else, the other day, saying that when she was a student, she had a job tying knots in sausages, which is an extraordinary image. But, the idea that students would somehow fill this, as the hop pickers used to do in the East End, and in my generation, we used to go potato picking, in spud bashing, we called it, in Hertfordshire. Look, that's nonsense. These economic forces have to come into it. I think in unskilled labour, in farm labour, mechanisation is one thing, and I think we can work on that, but ultimately you cannot simply rely on people to drive the wages down. However, what we do have in this country is a minimum wage. Therefore, there comes a point below which you cannot drive wages down, unless, of course, you have, the illegal gangs, which is why the previous government brought in this piece of legislation called the Gang Masters Act. Because, Jacob, I don't know what it's like in Somerset. I don't know something. I don't have a visa for Somerset. I'm not sure what goes on.
You'd be very welcome.
I rather doubt it, but because I don't earn £38,000 a year. But look, what used to happen was there'd be these gangs who would be brought into this country, and I'm thinking of the Vietnamese who were doing the fingernails, various other gangs were brought in by gang masters. I hope, by and large...
Well, there was that terrible incident where a number of
the cockle pickers
drowned.
In Morecambe Bay.
Yes.
It's horrendous. And these are people from Fujian in China who were brought in by the snakeheads, a particularly foul and vile gang. And these people were working for nothing, and they drowned and they died. We can address that. There's all these different issues, but ultimately, the real question, one thing I would say is, you quoted some figures for the people in this country. We do not have a clue how many people there are in this country. We simply do not know, because we don't have ID cards.
Well, I'm not in favour of ID cards.
I am.
But actually, the Deputy Speaker wanted short questions to the Home Secretary in Parliament earlier, and I had a longer question planned, so I ended up just asking about caps.
Who would have thought it?
But what I really wanted to ask about was the ONS's inaccuracy, because for 2022, they started off at 606,000, then it became 745,000. How can any government make policy when the numbers are so inaccurate and seem just to be guesses?
Well, I don't want to overpraise, one of your fellow presenters, Lee Anderson, but he had an extraordinary exchange in the Home Affairs Select Committee when he asked them, basically, how many people have been deported? I don't know. Well, how many people deported last year? I don't know. This week? They had no idea. We've got a paucity of data here in this country. So when you quoted those figures for the people in this country, with the greatest respect, sir, you don't know the accuracy of your figures.
Well, the Home Office does have some brilliant officials, because I happened to see sitting in the box in the House of Commons today somebody who had been my private secretary, who was one of the best private secretaries in Whitehall.
That's probably why they kept their job.
I won't name her, because it would embarrass her to be praised by me, probably. But thank you, Stephen. I'm delighted to be joined now by another friend of the programme, an immigration lawyer, Shoaib Khan. Thank you so much for coming on again. Do you think this is a reasonable solution to the problem?
I don't think it is. I mean, firstly, just going through, the 5 points, as you were saying, the government is particularly fond of 5-point plans, but some of them, I think they are quite horrendous, really. Firstly, one of the ones that you mentioned, obviously you said, you mentioned them, I think, rather euphemistically, really, family visas, but basically that means spouse visas. So if you're a British national and you want to bring your spouse to the UK, or your spouse is a foreign national and wants to remain in the UK with you, you need to be earning at least more than £38,000. I think that's horrendous. What about, nurses, teachers, so many other people, British people in the UK, who might make the mistake of falling in love with and marrying a foreign national. If they're earning less than 35, 37, 38,000, they can't have their wife or their husband in the UK with them. I think that's, that's horrendous. I think that's inhumane, really. Secondly,
can I clarify that? Because listening to the statement that the Home Secretary gave earlier, he was talking about dependents coming with non-British nationals. He wasn't talking about the spousal entry route. Have you seen in the documents that it will include the spousal entry route?
I think I have. I mean, particularly that's what all the correspondence, that's what the media is saying. I think that seems to be the consensus, as far as I can see, that it does include spouse visas. I mean, obviously, I would be absolutely delighted if it didn't. I would be more than happy to be corrected on that. But as far as I can see so far, I think the consensus generally is. Unless, of course, if you know to the contrary, of course, I'd be happy to be corrected. But
no, I don't know. I haven't.
If it would.
I haven't seen whether it includes the spousal entry route. But on the dependent route for people who are coming in to fill jobs, as Stephen Pound was saying, they are meant to be temporary, aren't they? They're not meant to be coming here as permanent residents.
Well, then we shouldn't have it as a settlement route, because that's the way we attract these people. We want the brainiest, most talented people in the world to come work here. And that's why we say, come work here for 5 years and then you can settle here. Be open about it. You can't settle here. So many other countries, the Middle East, so many other countries do that. You go there, you can work there a lifetime. You have to go back when you retire or when you leave. So at least be open about it if that's the case. But then don't lure people into that, by suggesting you can settle and then you can't. And again, even that, mainly talk about carers, nurses, other people, come here, change our pensioners' nappies, clean up our sick, clean up our hospitals, run the NHS basically. For your own children, they can't be in the country with you. I think, again, that's horrific.
I think you make a very good point. We should always be grateful to the individuals who come and carry out important work, the difficulty being the sheer weight of numbers. Unfortunately, thank you, Shoaib, for joining me. We've got to finish there. I hope to have you back on again soon. Coming up, we'll be assessing the intersection between immigration, the Middle East and queer theory, as well as the latest controversy at COP28. Oh, and don't forget, State of the Nation's Word of the Year competition. You won't want to floxy-knocky-nihilapelificate that.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new
It's
t-shirt.
your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. And we've been discussing mass migration, and you've been sending in your views. Graham says, here's my 5-point migration plan. Close the borders, close the borders, close the borders, etc. Roger, very interesting. Sorry, Jacob, the general public are actually more concerned about the boats. Illegal migration, not the legal migrants who work or study here. They are the costly ones who may have dubious or even criminal intentions and are mainly young men. I don't agree with you. I think the sheer weight of numbers means that legal migration has become a problem. And it's not to say that illegal isn't also something that needs to be dealt with, but we cannot take in 1.4 million people every 2 years. The 28th Conference of the Parties, that's what COP stands for, is grinding away over in Dubai, and as ever, it is not without controversy. This year's president, UAE's Sultan Al Jaber, has come under fire from the eco-mob for the crime of making the statement that it is unrealistic to phase out fossil fuels completely. He went on to explain that the agenda would take the world back into caves, owing to the fact that a removal of fossil fuels would stifle global development. And of course, it wasn't long before accusations of climate denial were being thrown about, whatever that might mean. But the Sultan makes the right point. The developing world, that is, the poorest countries in the world, are the ones who would suffer most if we got rid of fossil fuels straight away. And yet, when he makes this fairly obvious point, he gets absolutely lambasted. But with me is my brilliant panel, Amy Nicole-Turner and Annunziata Rees-Mogg. Amy, I'll let you have first go on this. Isn't the Sultan just telling us something that everybody knows?
Well, if we think about the people, the nations out of the 190 odd that are there are only 3 that agree with the Sultan, and that would be Russia, Saudi Arabia and China. Do we want to be added to that list, or do we want to be added to the scientific consensus of the 100 countries that support a phase down?
But he wasn't denying the consensus. He was saying that phasing them out straight away was just unrealistic, and that's a perfectly reasonable point.
It's not a reasonable point, though, because I say, why take your foot off the accelerator when you're winning the race?
Well, let's keep our foot on the accelerator and use lots more petrol. Come on, Annunziata.
Well, A, I don't think we are necessarily winning the race. B, I think that the UK is doing staggeringly more than most countries and
which is making
harming
us poorer.
ourselves in the process and hurting our people's prosperity. And that is, in fact, a mistake. And we might not want to be like Russia or China, but without China making enormous changes, anything we do here is basically meaningless. And can anyone be even vaguely surprised that a sultan in an oil-rich state who happens to be the CEO of an oil company that produces 2.7 million barrels of oil a day doesn't want oil phased out?
Well, this is what we really need to talk about, don't we? The clear conflict of interest. This is like having a summit for vegetarians held by somebody that incredibly profits from the meat industry. So they're obviously not going to be much vested interest in anything that COP stands for, really, from its president, because of who he is.
But isn't it just a recognition of reality that we are going to use fossil fuels for generations to come, and that cheap energy is the thing that gets people out of poverty, and that over the last 30 years, the numbers in absolute poverty have declined, what, from 1.8, 1.9 million to 700 million, from over 50% of the world's population to under 10%. This is a phenomenal achievement, mainly based on cheap energy.
So well done, Industrial Revolution. Now it's time for Green Revolution, because actually, if we stay the way we are, and we're not saying don't use oil and gas, we're saying no new oil and gas licences, no new licences.
Is pulling up the drawbridge behind us. Woohoo, we've had all the benefit, but you poor countries can't now compete. You can't fully catch up. You are stuck where you are because there isn't the replacement.
Which is why China's not so enthusiastic about it.
But the reality is that it's the poorer countries that have not contributed to the net emissions over the last 100 years. We've
so
contributed
you're absolutely
more, that suffer disproportionately from
China,
climate change.
With all the African nations continuing to use huge amounts of oil produced by the UAE and others, you're happy for that to carry on, but we have to impoverish everyone in the West as penance for having done well 100 years ago.
I think that this China argument is always a bit of an outlier, and actually China is more than you think.
I've left you with a final hanging sentence, but we're going to follow on from our discussion of mass migration, because fresh concerns have arisen surrounding Mickey Mouse degrees. We know that a large part of net migration owes itself to foreign students, and it suits universities' finances to continue this, with foreign students paying £25,000 for master's courses, while domestic students pay about £12,000. Emerged over the weekend that SOAS, University of London, has been offering a master's in Middle East queer politics, which explores, quote, historical, political, social and economic conditions underpinning the oppression of sexual minorities in Asian, African, Middle Eastern contexts, and problematising, that's not a word, even the Oxford Dictionary won't get that word, the application of culturist lens to sexuality-based oppression in the global south. Now, as riveting as that sounds, does such pontification do much to fill the gaps in our labour market? Come on, Amy, that's a racket, isn't it?
I just won't have this conversation because you're completely ignoring the fact of the 1.7 billion that these international students put into our economy by coming here, because we have one of the most renowned higher education systems.
To pay for other students to do Mickey Mouse degrees.
But how can you call it a Mickey Mouse degree?
British students to do meaningless degrees as well.
But you cannot. But it's because we've had conversations about gender, and I think it's interesting that within these what you call Mickey Mouse degrees was gender and queer studies. I actually did a module in that as part of my degree, and I think it shows when we come to the conversations about gender. Actually,
having listened to a lot of goth music in my misspent youth, I'm quite intrigued by a module called Gothic Bodies. But I don't think that we need to invite people into this country to study it. We need people to come here to study engineering, to study medicine, to study scientific serious courses that really will improve the future of our country. It is ridiculous to just have huge numbers coming in essentially just to fund the equally meaningless degrees that the British people do at half the cost.
They are not meaningless.
If we
degrees
scrap
like
the
this,
target of 50% of people going to university, degrees might actually go back to meaning something.
You know, saying that,
people and therefore their future
the only valuable
prosperity.
degree is something like engineering and just doing away with these humanities subjects is probably why the humanities sector within higher education is one of the least funded.
I wouldn't
and
get rid of them. I
crumbling.
wouldn't invite foreign people to come and do them. And to be able to bring a lot of these, in fact, all of these, as far as I saw, were master's degrees. The current situation, they could bring their families, dependents with them. We've got a huge problem with immigration, and this is adding to it massively with no gain for the country.
Big gain. I've pointed out the gain.
What, studying Gothic bodies and late medieval sexuality?
That is a one-off module, and you know that it's disingenuous to characterise the degree with one module. What degree did you do?
I did history.
So in history, there would have been some modules within it.
History is a proper subject. To answer on humanities, we want people doing history and theology and philosophy and
well, I did a philosophy
economics
degree, and there was a whole module in Introduction to Sexuality.
This was actually a master's on this nonsense.
You know
I mean, OK, this is the name of the degree, not a module. Yeah. Transitional Queer Feminist Politics.
And I'd love
we do not need to be bringing people into the country.
That's a cruel and unusual punishment. I think that's unconstitutional.
It would be helpful, and then you could be an educated advocate for the cause.
Well, I think it's about, to Annunziata's point, the economics of it, that we want people coming here who will contribute to the economy by then going on doing things that are useful and providing jobs. And we want people in this country to do courses. Well, a lot of them do. That's part of the problem.
A UK institution, because they're proud to have gone to a UK institution, which is a compliment to our higher education system, and then they're going to go back to their country with their CV bolstered and our economy
since 2018,
with the cherry on top.
The number of dependents has risen from 16,000 to 135,000. There are also 73,000 students on graduate visas. They're not insignificant numbers in any way.
I've allowed Annunziata the last word this time. Amy had the last word the time before, so thank you to my incisive panel. Coming up, could Britain be destined for the dystopia of smoking-style restrictions on junk food, as new analysis suggests £100 billion annual cost for obesity? Plus, the Norwegians, our old friends and allies, have rather embarrassingly shipped a slightly spindly tree to Trafalgar Square, and they're a bit embarrassed about it, I think.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this remains State of the Nation. We've been discussing Middle East queer politics and COP28, and you have some strong views on this. Robin says, if we can't use our own oil owing to climate change, then what about the climate where the imported fuel comes from? It's a fair enough point. And Brian, why is renewable energy so expensive, and why does it rely on subsidies? Well, I think the answer to that is clear. It is quite expensive. George Orwell once said, I am fat, but I'm thin inside. There's a thin man inside every fat man. But the question is there a thin person inside all 10 million obese people in the United Kingdom? Well, new analysis from the Tony Blair Institute has suggested that Britain's obesity problem could cost the taxpayer £100 billion a year, with the government's former food advisor, Henry Dimbleby, claiming obesity as having disastrous effects on national productivity, as well as calling on authorities to introduce smoking-style restrictions on unhealthy food. And while obesity is a serious problem, is it really the state's role to start wagging the finger at people who are well within their rights to be overweight, chaining them down to a dystopia of nanny-statism in which we are taxed for our indulgences? Well, I'm joined now by Steve Miller, the weight loss expert and host of Fat Families. Steve, thank you very much for joining me. Do you think we should be bossed about and told not to eat our favourite cream eggs in season?
Oh, I think there's absolutely a place for being down to earth about the obesity problem rather than being waffle centric, because what we've had over the last sort of 20 years is nothing but a load of academic waffle. We've had no one in government that's been willing to be straight and direct. And I think now we're in a time where the culture needs to be changed, and that starts at the top. But I'm afraid with the Prime Minister we've got, I think there's more chance of me coming down your chimney, Jacob, on Christmas morning.
Yeah, but the Prime Minister's pretty thin. He's a model of healthy eating.
I could say a lot more. I mean, well, you're very slim as well. I mean, you look great. You look like you need a good meal inside you, to be quite honest.
But frankly, isn't this the point? There's a brilliant book by Dr. Andrew Jenkinson, Why We Eat Too Much, that argues that a lot of it is genetic, and that the Prime Minister and I are fortunate in that genetically, my sister's here, who is as thin as a stick. We're just lucky genetically that I can eat my cream eggs, I can eat my foie gras, whatever it is, and I don't become Mr. Tubby. Other people aren't so fortunate.
Well, I think that's, frankly, chubs to cobblers, and because no one is fat in a famine. And I've always said to anybody, you know, that says, "Oh, everything's genetic," and a lot of people say that they're too fat because of their genes. I say, "Come and live with me for a week, and you'll soon lose weight."
Have you read Dr. Andrew Jenkinson's book? Because I'd strongly recommend it. It's really interesting because he is a bariatric surgeon.
I don't want more waffle. I don't. No, Jacob.
It's a really good book.
Listen, we've read enough books. We've read the books as a nation.
You're sounding like Michael Gove. You don't like experts.
Listen, you need to get more red wall in your speak when you're talking about this sort of stuff.
More red meat in my diet? No.
And we need to be saying to people, own your body, If you've got children, they're your responsibility in terms of their obesity level. What we do not want to be telling the nation is to read fancy books and listen to loads of excuses. And that's what we've been doing. And in the culture we live in now, we have normalized obesity. It's even become trendy now to actually love your curves, which actually is a euphemism for actually saying, love yourself fat. In fact, sing, if you're happy and you're fat, clap your hands. We
All
have
right, well, thank you. If you're happy and you're fat, clap your hands. Thank you, Steve. Over to my panel. Amy, you're definitely not fat, so I don't know why you're clapping your hands.
I have struggled with my weight a lot, and that man was partially responsible because throughout the noughties, he fat-shamed the nation, and he needs to appreciate that it is just science that 75% of your weight is, as you said, genetic. The other 25% is lifestyle, which is completely increased by inequality and fueled by inequality. So it generally is, the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be fat, and that's because of our food production. Our food production, you can label it, you can do whatever you want, but what we need to do is, instead of penalising people for having unhealthy choices, we need to reward people for making healthy choices. And surely that would come from subsidising fresh fruit and giving easy access to fresh fruit. Most people don't even shop in their local shops. They'll shop where is cheapest. And what food is cheapest? Unhealthy food. It's calorie by calorie 10% cheaper, and that's why people are fat, not because of what he says.
I think we can get Steve back to answer your fat-shaming point. So, Steve, are you still there? Come on, you've been fat-shaming the nation. That's awful.
For 20 years, he's made a career of it.
That's a bit mean of you.
Oh, I've made a career of it because I'm very good at it. And your panellists usually they usually come out with this cobblers. Oh, you're fat shaming because you're saying that being fat is wrong. I've helped thousands of people lose weight and absolutely take their self-esteem.
Losing weight is not important. So weight-centric approaches to health are not important. Your weight is not a metric directly of your health. 30% of larger bodies are perfectly healthy. You are so incredibly wrong, and pushing this stigma that you do is actually the thing that causes people to yo-yo diet and be unhealthy. The more unhealthy thing than putting on weight is stress. Stress is worse for you, and you encourage that.
I'll give Steve a very brief response, and then we must bring Annunziata in.
I'm beginning to think that your panellist is actually saying being fat is okay.
I'm in recovery from an eating disorder and have been for the last 15 years. That's why I know a lot about this subject, and I'm very, very passionate about this subject. And you're suggesting that being in a large body can't be healthy, and you're wrong. I'm the healthiest I've ever been. I used to be 6.5 stone, and everyone would say I look great because of a culture that you perpetuated.
All right. I think we've got to bring Annunziata in, Steve, so I'm going to cut you off momentarily. Annunziata.
After that discussion, I'm not sure I know where to begin, but I think one of the issues we really do have to take seriously is ultra-processed foods. Yeah. That there is a very clear problem with the disadvantages to health from highly processed foods. If you look at what Chris van Tulleken has written about it, the effect on the body is really quite extraordinary. But we have taken away from schools teaching people to cook. Parents don't know how to cook, therefore can't teach their children to cook. We have got an intergenerational issue with being able to provide simple, healthy food that we need to address.
That's the other part of Dr. Andrew Jenkinson's book. It's that a big chunk of it's genetic, and the next part is over-processed food. And the person who gave me the book teaches people to cook healthy food for themselves and take control of their own lifestyles.
Affordability and access to that. If you're a single mum to 3 kids, you don't always have time to make healthy food, so we also need to take that into consideration. Nobody wants to feed their kids.
Is definitely great.
Nobody wants to feed their kids unhealthy food.
But I think there is also a question of putting emotions into food. And there are a large number of people in the country who have problems with overeating because they associate food with reward. They associate food with making them feel better in some way. And I think we do, a lot of us, train our children to think like that. Oh, it'll be all right, here's a chocolate bar. I mean, that's very simplistic, but that's another layer. It is a complicated issue, but it is not all down to let's have a sugar tax and it'll all go away.
There's no moralising of food. That's something that Steve Miller has done throughout his work. Good food, bad food. If you eat this, you're bad. If you are fat, you're inherently somehow lazier than everyone else. It's not true, and it's a myth that perpetuates weight gain. So if somebody is told, oh, you're lazy, the first thing they're going to want to do is go straight and buy some food to comfort themselves. Eating and obesity and weight is such a complex thing. To reduce it to eat less and move more. I am less Katie Hopkins and much more Chris Van Tolkien.
It absolutely is. But it is still unacceptable. We've got 350,000 people.
But I don't think it's just not worth blaming them. It's worth looking at it more
It's a big picture.
We're going to have to move on to the King of Norway.
What's he done?
Because every year, since the King of Norway came to live in exile in the UK amidst the Nazi occupation, it's been a tradition that the Norwegians would send one of their pines to the UK for a Christmas tree presentation. But now for the second year running, we've been sent a rather poor specimen. It has been improved by tree surgeons employed by Westminster City Council. But just to emphasise the point, it's been reported that a source at the new City Council in Oslo has said this could be the last year they send it to us owing to environmental concerns. So is this the Norwegian way of letting us down gently? Well, thank you to my panel. Coming up, an amendment to the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, which you know all about, could see the Duke and Duchess of Sussex lose their titles. But for tonight, I'm on their side. And don't forget, the results are in for State of the Nation's Word of the Year competition. Did you vote for latibulate or perhaps triskaidekaphobia? The winner will be revealed. And I should have added a dolomite, but I forgot. Anyway, that will be for...
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation, and we've been discussing the cost of obesity. And Anne says the problem is that Lee Anderson puts it, people cannot cook. Well, I'm not one to talk, I can't cook. Francis, vegetables are not expensive, and most supermarkets actually give away a certain amount of free fruit. very good points. Well, it's no secret that our royal family has Germanic ancestry. Indeed, Queen Victoria married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. As a result of this, his German titles were handed down to the descendants of their youngest son, Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, and the Duke of Cumberland had inherited through the laws that prevented it going to Queen Victoria, the Elector of Hanover, the Kingdom of Hanover. So the German antecedents of our family is well known. It was all fine until the First World War began, when we had the odd situation in which British princes were officers in the German army fighting against the Allies. Ultimately, Parliament passed the Titles Deprivation Act in 1917, 3 years into the war, which enabled Parliament, actually the Privy Council, to revoke the prince's titles. Now, in a twist to this, it seems the Titles Deprivation Act could be amended to revoke the Duke and Duchesses of Sussex titles in what has been dubbed the nuclear option by the MP behind the bill, Bob Seeley. This comes after the scandalous week in which the odious blighter Scobie supposedly accidentally revealed the names of the alleged royal racists in the Dutch translation of his book. Well, I'm joined now by the greatest expert available on this, the royal biographer and commentator, Angela Levin. Angela, thank you so much for joining me. I've been waiting to get you on my programme because you're regular for GB News. So, the Duke of Albany, the Duke of Cumberland and his son, and Viscount Tafe had their titles taken away by the Titles Deprivation Act because they were fighting for the enemy, they were on the enemy's side in a war. They were arguably traitors, though not necessarily, because some of them had been in Germany or Austria their whole lives. This really isn't the case for the Duke of Sussex. It's overkill, isn't it?
Yes, it's not going to work anyway because, as you know more than me, that there's only 20 people who can give an idea that they would like to take through, but he's not in that, so there's not really any time to do it. But the other way, I don't think everybody's going to vote for that. It seems a very old-fashioned thing to do, and I don't think that King Charles will have anything to do with it either. I think he's in a terrible position, but I think, like a lot of parents who have wayward children, that you love the child but you hate what they're doing. And I think because Meghan is so dramatic and unpredictable and he is so crushed, that actually the door is always open for him.
To come back. And that's probably true of the country at large, isn't it? That if he were to come back, it would be like the prodigal son, and that the country would go out to welcome him, as long as he came back in the way the prodigal son did, with humility and asking the nation to take him back into their arms.
I think it will be very hard for him to get the nation to like him. I think because of what he said about his father and the lies he's told, I think he's remembered everything from a small age when William got one more sausage than him, and he's very annoyed about it. But, you know, all those tiny little things that annoyed him have grown enormously over time, and I think he won't be able to change back into the lovely Harry. When I interviewed him for my biography of him, he was charming, he was wonderful with people, and really happy, although he had said he'd like to move on, but he wanted to stay there for the Queen. But I think it would take a long time for us Brits to forgive him how he's been so awful about his parent and his brother and sister-in-law.
But shouldn't those of us, like the two of us, who love the monarchy and everything that it stands for, want to be generous and not vindictive, and therefore we don't actually want to take his title away? We regret that he's behaving like this and that these stories are coming out, but we don't want to add fuel to the fire. We want things to calm down, and that requires a degree of generosity.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right, but I think there's a big difference between an act of generosity and what you feel in your heart when somebody has really hurt someone that you respect and care about and you think work very hard.
Yes, and that must, as you say, be difficult for the King, which is where the Royal Titles Deprivation Act is not the right way to go, because that ultimately would go to the Privy Council, which the King is present at. And I think to ask the King to take away his own son's title would be monstrously unfair. It would be quite a cruel thing to do to the King.
Yes, it would be. But we've also got, as an example of the King's decision-making, is the Councillors of State. Usually there's 4 in order in the hierarchy, and if the King or the Queen is ill or they're away, they can sign documents and stand in their place. But because of what Harry has done, there are 2 more. Princess Anne and Prince Edward came in, so that you only need 4, so that Harry would not be involved anymore. But it's a gentle one. It wasn't cruel. Well, it didn't send him back.
It was very important. I was, for a time, president of the council and was very conscious that we didn't have enough councillors of state who were available because the Duke of Edinburgh had got too old and had retired. The Duke of York was absent for obvious reasons. The Duke of Sussex was going abroad. And therefore, what were you going to do if the late Queen was incapacitated? And this has made a safety valve for the Constitution to ensure business can always be carried on.
Yes, I mean, but he hasn't wanted to actually... A lot of people wanted to get rid of Harry entirely.
He's left on the list.
But he's left on the list, but won't necessarily be used. But it worries me, actually, because he is, you know, 6th to the throne, but 5th to the throne now. But there's children before him.
Yes.
And King Charles is quite old, and also, if anything, God forbid, happened to William, you know, we've got a terrible problem there.
Well, may the King live
think about it.
forever, as we always say. Thank you very much, Angela. And finally, the moment you've been waiting for, the State of the Nation Word of the Year competition. Every year, the Oxford English Dictionary hosts a Word of the Year competition, and this year's nominations included Swiftie, de-influencing and beige flag. But the winner was Riz, not a term with which I was formerly familiar, but have had explained to me by my daughter, and it means style, charm or attractiveness, apparently a corruption of charisma. Well, considering how unexciting these words were and that I didn't know them, we thought at any rate hold our own parallel competition, releasing the following nominations earlier today: triskaidekaphobia, latibulate, blighter and sesquipedalian. Now, you know, triskaidekaphobia means an irrational fear of the number 13, particularly on Friday the 13th, and it scored 18.5%. Latibulate, which means hide away in the corner with shame, which was the Daily Mail's obscure word a few weeks ago, and I thought it was so good it needed a wider audience, got a mere 11.7%. Oh, you've let me down there. I like latibulate. Sesquipedalian, which means polysyllabic, if that helps, scored 15.8%, but our winner is a word that Sixtus particularly likes and occasionally employs against his father, is blighter, and it got 54.1%, and we'll be using that word again and again against that awful Scobie, who is a blighter. Anyway, thank you very much to Angela again. That's all from me. Up next is Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare tonight?
Great riz there, Jacob. I'm having a look at the Great Migration betrayal. Why? Because is the government now happy with 400,000 plus people a year net, and that's before we've gone to the illegal stuff.
Well, that all sounds absolutely brilliant. No blighters on your programme. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset will be gorgeous.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. It's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's been a bit of a grim day for many parts of the UK. The rain eases over the next 24 hours, only gradually, however, and then clearer and colder weather returns to the UK, albeit briefly, before further areas of low pressure come our way later this week. So the first area of low pressure is clearing. It's clearing to the southeast. Wrapped around it, a number of occluded fronts. That means bands of rain continuing for southern Scotland, northern England, into the Midlands, parts of Wales and the southwest, also seeing a number of showers overnight. But the more persistent rain is gradually easing. Northern Scotland, meanwhile, sees quite low temperatures overnight. Temperatures down to -5 Celsius in places, and with some showers feeding in overnight as well. There'll be a few slippery surfaces first thing on Tuesday to watch out for. But that's where the brightest weather will be, and that brighter weather will spread into southern Scotland, much of Northern Ireland, western England and Wales by the afternoon. Central and eastern England still subject to outbreaks of rain or showers even into the afternoon, and staying cool here with the breeze from the North Sea. But then the rain clears widely.